Guadalcanal, August 1943, and Marine Lieutenant Robert Henderson crouches in dense jungle undergrowth, watching Japanese soldiers move through a clearing 200 yards away. He needs to call in artillery support immediately, but as he reaches for his backpack radio, the memory of what happened to Baker Company 3 weeks earlier flashes through his mind. Their radio man had transmitted from this same ridge, and within minutes Japanese direction-finding teams had triangulated his position, bringing down mortar fire that killed 7 Marines before they could relocate. Henderson knows that every second he transmits makes him a target, that the Japanese are listening, hunting for American radio signals with the same sophisticated equipment they've been using since the start of the war. But what the Japanese cannot possibly know, what their intelligence officers have failed to comprehend despite capturing American equipment on multiple battlefields, is that the radio strapped to Henderson's back represents a technological revolution they cannot duplicate. As he extends the antenna on his SCR-300 and begins his transmission, the Japanese listening posts scattered across Guadalcanal will hear nothing but static, because the frequency modulation system inside this American radio operates on principles that Japanese engineers have tried and failed to replicate for 2 years. The story of how American radios remained nearly impossible to intercept begins not on Pacific battlefields, but in the laboratories and workshops of peacetime America, where engineers had been quietly developing a technology that would prove as decisive as radar or code breaking in determining the outcome of the war. Frequency modulation, invented by Edwin Howard Armstrong in the mid-1930s, represented a fundamental reimagining of how radio waves could carry information. Traditional amplitude modulation, used by every major military force at the war's beginning, varied the strength or amplitude of a radio wave to encode voice or data, creating signals that were clear and easy to receive but also vulnerable to interference from electrical equipment, atmospheric conditions, and deliberate jamming. Armstrong's frequency modulation system instead varied the frequency of the carrier wave itself, creating transmissions that were remarkably resistant to interference and far more difficult to intercept or jam effectively. The American military, initially skeptical of this new technology, would eventually embrace it with an enthusiasm that would transform battlefield communications and leave America's enemies struggling to keep pace. The development of American FM tactical radios represents one of those peculiar stories where military necessity, corporate competition, and individual genius combined to create something revolutionary. In 1940, as war clouds gathered over Europe and the Pacific, the US Army Signal Corps issued specifications for a portable infantry radio that would allow squad and company-level units to communicate reliably under combat conditions. The requirements seemed straightforward enough. The radio needed to be man-portable, battery-powered, capable of transmitting at least 3 miles, and rugged enough to survive the abuse of frontline combat. What made these specifications revolutionary was a single engineer's conviction that frequency modulation rather than amplitude modulation should be the foundation of the design. Daniel Noble, working for the Galvin Manufacturing Company, which would later become Motorola, understood that FM offered advantages that went far beyond simple interference resistance. He recognized that FM signals operating in the VHF band between 40 and 48 MHz would provide crystal clear voice quality even in the presence of vehicle ignition noise, would be far less susceptible to atmospheric interference, and most importantly, would be significantly harder for enemy forces to intercept or jam effectively. Noble's vision faced considerable resistance from Signal Corps traditionalists who understood amplitude modulation and were skeptical of abandoning proven technology for an unproven system. But Noble possessed both technical brilliance and remarkable persuasive ability, and he managed to convince Signal Corps representatives that FM represented the future of tactical communications. The contract awarded to Galvin Manufacturing in 1942 carried a priority designation that reflected the military's growing understanding that modern warfare would be won or lost based on the speed and reliability of tactical communications. The radio that emerged from Noble's team, designated the SCR-300 and nicknamed the walkie-talkie despite weighing 35 pounds and being carried as a backpack, would prove to be one of the most significant communications innovations of the entire war. The SCR-300 incorporated an 18-tube FM transceiver that could operate on 41 different channels across its frequency range, featured automatic frequency control to prevent drift, included sophisticated squelch circuits to eliminate background noise, and was built with a level of ruggedness that allowed it to function reliably in conditions ranging from Arctic cold to tropical humidity. The Japanese military's first encounter with American FM radio equipment came in August 1943, when Marine forces landed on New Georgia in the Solomon Islands, carrying SCR-300 radios for the first time in combat. Japanese intelligence officers, accustomed to intercepting American radio traffic with relative ease using their sophisticated direction-finding networks, found themselves suddenly unable to locate or even clearly receive American tactical transmissions. The reports that reached Japanese Naval Intelligence Headquarters described American radio traffic as strangely immune to their standard interception techniques, with signals that seemed to vanish into static whenever Japanese operators attempted to tune in on them. What the Japanese discovered to their growing alarm was that their entire signals intelligence apparatus had been optimized for intercepting amplitude modulation transmissions, and the techniques that worked so effectively against AM simply failed when applied to FM. Japanese listening posts equipped with Type 93 direction-finding equipment could detect that American transmissions were occurring, could sometimes approximate the general direction from which they originated, but could not reliably intercept the content of those transmissions, or provide accurate enough locations for effective artillery targeting. The technical reasons for Japanese difficulties with American FM transmissions reveal the fundamental differences between the two modulation systems and expose critical weaknesses in Japanese radio technology that would persist throughout the war. Amplitude modulation receivers, which constituted the vast majority of Japanese military radio equipment, detected signals by measuring variations in signal strength across a relatively narrow frequency range. These receivers could pick up AM transmissions with remarkable sensitivity, could operate across a wide range of frequencies, and were relatively simple to manufacture and maintain. But they were fundamentally incompatible with frequency modulation, which encoded information not in signal strength variations, but in rapid frequency changes that AM receivers simply could not detect or decode. When Japanese operators tuned their AM receivers to frequencies where American FM transmissions were occurring, they heard only noise because their equipment was measuring the wrong characteristic of the radio wave. It would be like trying to read a book by weighing the pages instead of looking at the printed words. Technically possible to detect that something is present, but impossible to extract any meaningful information. The Japanese military's response to this technological challenge demonstrates both the sophistication of their engineering capabilities and the insurmountable difficulties they faced in attempting to replicate American FM technology under wartime conditions. Japanese engineers, after capturing several American SCR-300 radios on various Pacific battlefields, attempted to reverse engineer the technology to create their own FM receivers that could intercept American transmissions. The radios were carefully disassembled, their circuits photographed and diagrammed, their components analyzed in detail. Japanese technical intelligence reports from late 1943 acknowledged the superiority of American FM design, noting the exceptional clarity of transmissions, the resistance to interference, and the difficulty of interception. But understanding the principles of FM and successfully manufacturing FM equipment under wartime conditions proved to be entirely different challenges. The SCR-300's sophisticated circuitry required precision components that Japanese industry struggled to manufacture in adequate quantities, demanded high-quality crystal oscillators that were in short supply, and incorporated design features that reflected years of American experience with VHF radio systems that Japan simply did not possess. The few experimental Japanese FM receivers that were produced never achieved widespread deployment, remaining in small numbers at major intelligence facilities where their marginal effectiveness hardly justified the resources invested in them. The harsh reality facing Japanese signals intelligence was that American FM transmissions had rendered obsolete an entire generation of interception equipment that had been painstakingly built up over years of development. Even more frustrating for Japanese intelligence officers was the realization that the frequency modulation system offered Americans capabilities beyond simple interception resistance. FM signals, operating in the VHF band, propagated in fundamentally different ways than the HF, and lower frequency signals that dominated Japanese military communications. VHF frequencies travelled in straight lines, limiting their range to the visual horizon, which meant that American tactical transmissions rarely propagated beyond the immediate battle area. This characteristic, which might seem like a limitation, actually provided significant security advantages because it meant that Japanese listening posts located miles away from American positions could not receive tactical FM transmissions at all, regardless of how sophisticated their equipment might be. The impact of FM radio on American tactical operations proved revolutionary in ways that extended far beyond simple communication security. Marine and Army units equipped with SCR-300 radios discovered that they could coordinate complex maneuvers with a speed and precision that had been impossible with previous radio systems. Company commanders could speak directly to platoon leaders, artillery forward observers could adjust fire in real time, and tank infantry cooperation became dramatically more effective when tanks were equipped with modified SCR-300s that allowed direct voice communication between armoured vehicles and supporting infantry. The clarity of FM transmissions meant that messages were understood correctly the first time, eliminating the errors and misunderstandings that had plagued AM radio communications. The resistance to interference meant that radios functioned reliably even in the presence of vehicle engines, electrical storms, or other sources of radio noise that would have rendered AM transmissions unintelligible. The German military, facing American FM radios in North Africa and Europe, encountered the same frustrations that plagued the Japanese in the Pacific. German signals intelligence, among the most sophisticated in the world, had achieved remarkable success in intercepting and decoding Allied communications throughout the early years of the war. German intercept companies attached to frontline units routinely monitored Allied radio traffic, providing tactical intelligence that influenced German defensive operations. But when American forces began deploying FM tactical radios in significant numbers during the Italian campaign and the Normandy invasion, German intercept operators found their carefully honed skills suddenly ineffective. German technical intelligence reports acknowledged that American FM radio represented a significant technological achievement, noting that German industry had made only limited progress in developing comparable systems. The German military did operate some FM equipment, particularly in tank and aircraft radios, but the vast majority of German tactical communications remained based on amplitude modulation, leaving them vulnerable to Allied interception, while making it nearly impossible for Germans to monitor American FM transmissions effectively. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided a dramatic demonstration of how American FM radio contributed to tactical success under the most challenging conditions. German forces, launching their surprise offensive through the Ardennes, achieved initial success partly through strict radio silence that prevented Allied intelligence from detecting their preparations. But once the offensive began, American units equipped with SCR-300 radios were able to coordinate their defensive responses with a speed and effectiveness that surprised German commanders. American artillery units, using FM radio to communicate between forward observers and fire direction centres, delivered devastating counter-battery fire that disrupted German artillery support. Infantry units maintained communication despite the chaos of German breakthrough attacks, allowing for coordinated counterattacks and the establishment of defensive positions that slowed the German advance. German intelligence officers monitoring Allied communications found themselves largely blind to American tactical dispositions because FM transmissions remained uninterceptable by their equipment, forcing them to rely on visual observation and prisoner interrogations for tactical intelligence that they had previously obtained through signals intercepts. The development of American vehicular FM radios paralleled the success of the SCR-300 infantry set, creating a family of compatible radios that revolutionized combined arms operations. The SCR-508 and SCR-608 tank radios, operating on lower frequencies but using the same FM technology, provided tank units with reliable communication that allowed for coordinated maneuvers that had been impossible with the earlier AM equipment. Tank commanders could communicate with other tanks, with supporting infantry and with higher headquarters using clear, interference-free transmissions that dramatically improved tactical coordination. The fact that these radios all use frequency modulation meant that a tank-mounted SCR-508 could, when necessary, communicate with infantry, carrying SCR-300s, creating integrated tactical networks that linked all combat arms. German tankers, monitoring American tank movements, often found themselves unable to intercept American tank radio traffic, leaving them tactically blind in ways that contributed to the dominance of American armoured formations in the final year of the war. The strategic implications of American FM radio superiority extended beyond individual battles to influence the entire conduct of the war in both Europe and the Pacific. American forces could conduct complex operations with confidence that their tactical communications remained secure from enemy interception, allowing for operational security that contributed to the success of major offensives. The inability of Japanese and German forces to effectively intercept American tactical radio traffic meant that Allied commanders possessed intelligence advantages that complemented the ultra-intelligence derived from breaking axis codes. While Ultra revealed strategic intentions and operational plans, secure tactical FM communications ensured that even routine battlefield conversations remained hidden from enemy intelligence, creating multiple layers of communication security that Axis forces could never match. The psychological impact on enemy forces of fighting an opponent whose tactical communications remained essentially invisible proved significant, contributing to the sense among both German and Japanese commanders that they were being progressively overwhelmed by American technological superiority. The manufacturing scale behind American FM radio production reveals the industrial might that undergirded American technological advantages throughout the war. Motorola alone produced nearly 50,000 SCR-300 radios during the war years, while other manufacturers contributed additional tens of thousands of vehicular FM sets. This production occurred while American industry was simultaneously producing millions of other radio sets, thousands of radar systems, and countless other electronic devices that equipped American and Allied forces. Japanese and German industry, struggling under the burden of strategic bombing and resource shortages, could not match this production scale even if they had possessed equivalent technical knowledge. The industrial foundation that allowed America to equip essentially every infantry company, every tank platoon, and every artillery battery with reliable FM radios simply did not exist in Axis nations, creating equipment disparities that grew progressively worse as the war continued. The post-war evaluation of communications equipment captured from Japanese and German forces revealed the extent of the technological gap that had developed in tactical radio systems. American technical intelligence teams examining captured Japanese radios found equipment that, while often well-constructed and suitable for its intended purposes, remained fundamentally based on amplitude modulation, technology that was increasingly obsolete for tactical applications. Japanese Type 94 infantry radios, the rough equivalent of American SCR-300s, operated on lower frequencies using AM, making them more susceptible to interference, easier to intercept, and generally less effective than their American counterparts. German equipment showed more sophistication, with some FM capability in specialized applications, but the bulk of German tactical radios remained AM-based, leaving German forces vulnerable to the same interception that they had so effectively practiced against others earlier in the war. The recognition among captured German and Japanese signals intelligence officers that American FM radio had rendered their interception networks largely obsolete against American forces provided a sobering confirmation of the technological revolution that frequency modulation represented. The evolution of the American FM radio during the war years demonstrated the American military's willingness to embrace technological innovation and adapt equipment based on field experience. Early SCR-300 radios, while revolutionary, suffered from battery life issues in Pacific operations where high humidity and temperature drained batteries faster than in temperate climates. American engineers responded by developing improved battery systems and modified radio circuitry that reduced power consumption, extending operational time under tropical conditions. The addition of features like improved squelch circuits, better antenna systems, and ruggedized construction reflected ongoing refinement based on combat feedback. This iterative improvement process, driven by close cooperation between field units and engineering teams, ensured that American FM radio equipment progressively improved throughout the war, widening rather than narrowing the technological gap with enemy equipment. The British military's adoption of American FM radio technology reveals the extent to which Allied forces recognized the superiority of the American approach to tactical communications. British forces, initially equipped with their own designs, based largely on AM technology, progressively shifted to American FM equipment as the war progressed. British paratroopers and commandos particularly valued the SCR-300 for its reliability and security, carrying American radios on operations throughout Europe. After the war, the British military formally adopted the SCR-300 design, producing it as the wireless set number 31 for British forces, a testament to the recognition that American FM technology had established new standards for tactical communications. The British decision to abandon their own radio development programs in favour of the American designs represented an unusual acknowledgement of technical superiority that highlighted how significantly FM had transformed military communications. The legacy of American World War II FM radio extends far beyond the conflict itself, establishing foundations for modern military communications that remain relevant today. The principle that tactical communications should be secure, interference-resistant, and difficult to intercept became fundamental to military communications doctrine, driving developments that led to modern frequency hopping systems, spread spectrum communications, and encrypted digital radio. The SCR-300 and its related radios demonstrated that tactical communication security could be achieved not just through codes and ciphers, but through fundamental advances in how radio waves carried information. Modern military radios, with their sophisticated frequency hopping algorithms and digital encryption, represent the descendants of those first FM tactical sets that gave American forces such decisive advantages in World War II. The recognition that communication security begins with the basic physics of radio transmission, rather than merely with message encryption, traces directly back to the decisions made by engineers like Daniel Noble, who insisted that frequency modulation represented the future of military communications. The story of American FM radio in World War II ultimately reveals how technological innovation, industrial capacity, and battlefield adaptation combined to create advantages that enemies could recognize but never overcome. Japanese and German engineers understood the principles of frequency modulation, could analyze captured American equipment, and recognize the superiority of the American approach. But understanding technology and successfully deploying it under wartime conditions remained entirely different challenges, particularly when that deployment required industrial capabilities, component manufacturing precision, and system integration experience that took years to develop. American forces fought the war secure in the knowledge that their tactical radio conversations remained essentially private, that their operational coordination occurred beyond enemy observation, and that their communications infrastructure provided advantages that enemies could never match, regardless of how many American radios they captured. That invisible advantage, built into the circuitry of thousands of backpack and vehicular radios, contributed as significantly to Allied victory as more celebrated technological achievements like radar and atomic weapons, proof that sometimes the most important innovations are those that enemies never see coming and cannot replicate even when they know exactly what they're facing.